Självklart betalar man alltid sin skatt. Men föreställer en värld utan skatter, där lagar och regler kan anpassas efter ens egna önskemål. Den världen finns. Följ med på en resa från Norfolk till Nairobi, från Long Island till London, från Amsterdam till Dubai.
I love the phrase that we're looking for neutral taxation. It actually means no tax, by the way.
And actually, we now know where the money is. It's parked in these offshore havens.
You know, we're greedy. We're greedy people. We are in a battle with each other and our governments to survive.
I dokument utifrån ikväll, välkomna på en rundresa i skatteparadisen.
They sell 20 million iPads a year for about $500 retail. That's $10 billion. In China, they've been employing about 1.2 million Chinese workers, and they pay about $40 to $50 a piece for those iPads. So the iPads that they're selling for about 10 times what they're buying from China. So China realizes about $800 million out of the 10 billion. Where does the rest of the $10 billion go? Well, they park about $2.2 billion of royalties offshore on low-tax havens. So the total gross margin on all this is about $6 billion, and the total effective tax, we've looked at Apple in the last year, they've paid about 1.9% tax, corporate tax rate in the United States. Remember, the United States effective tax rate is 35%. Dennis Healey, the former UK chancellor, said the difference between evasion and avoidance is the width of a prison wall. So when you're into this kind of higher echelon tax gaming, the rules are very flexible.
Hur kan Apple betala bara 1,9% i skatt på vinsterna man gör utanför USA? För att förstå det följer här en rundtur genom en värld som för de flesta är dold. En värld där multinationella företags kapitalflöden struktureras och ibland gör en snabb mellanlandning på Caymanöarna, Cypern eller i Amsterdam. Det är en så kallad offshore-värld som existerar bakom fysiska och virtuella murar och där låga eller inga skatter betalas.
My day job as a corporate investigator is looking at offshore structures, tax haven structures of companies that our clients are going to invest in. So it's looking at their relationships, it's looking how they acquired their wealth to begin with, and it's looking at the corporate structures that they employ. And often these will be long, complicated, completely mysterious chains involving different tax havens. Something called, say, for example, the Cyprus sandwich, where you might have a Ukrainian company, so Ukrainian assets which are then owned by a Cyprus company that's then owned by a Luxembourg company that's then owned by a Cyprus company that then goes off in 5 different ways to Belize, British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands and Panama. And this is the stuff we're looking at. And we have to, well, I think in that case, it's pretty clear that things aren't very clear and aren't transparent.
Det här är konsulten och utredaren William Britton Catlin. På uppdrag av stora finansinstitut kartlägger han de globala kapitalflödenas skuggsida.
So this is this is what we're looking at. Here's our Cyprus sandwich. Goes up to Belize. I mean, it's very confusing to work out what's going on here. I mean, there's no rational explanation for what is happening, but you can see that all these individuals here at the top, Mr. A, Mr. B, C, D, E, and F, are all ultimately holding these assets through a series of chains, levels, cutouts. They're in Belize, and these probably we would think would go back to bank accounts in Switzerland. So this may not even be the end of it.
Hur kan Apple betala bara 1,9% i skatt på vinsterna man gör utanför USA? Om de utländska vinsterna istället flöt in till Apples huvudkontor skulle bolaget betala 35% i bolagsskatt. För att undvika det skickar Apple vinsterna till ett dotterbolag på Irland där skatten är mycket lägre, 12,5%. Men först skickas vinsterna via Nederländerna där immateriell egendom beskattas mycket lågt eller inte alls. Den reducerade vinsten går sedan via ett annat irländskt dotterbolag till brittiska Jungfruöarna där bolagsskatten är 0. Apple ses som en pionjär för det här upplägget som vanligen kallas en dubbel irländsk med en holländsk sandwich.
Let's see who uses this tax haven system. I mean, you've got to see the tax haven offshore financial system as being part and parcel of the mainstream economic system. I mean, there's a pretty much a complete integration between one and the other. So the money is flowing around. It's not complicated. I mean, there are these options out there, and you use them, you explore them, you see what you can do, and what you're looking at is a map, which is, it's not a uniform financial economic world out there, especially when it comes to tax and where you can place your money and how it's taxed. There are different rates all over the world. So you take advantage of the different rates. I mean, it's kind of fairly obvious, really.
It became clear over time that this offshore industry was growing, but surprisingly enough, nobody had made any estimates of the size and growth of the industry. You'd expect the World Bank or the IMF to take an interest in this. They have all these economists. The OECD does a lot of work on tax havens, but nobody had ever quantified the size of the offshore industry. And so,
why is that, you think?
Well, it's a very controversial subject. I mean, the World Bank spent a lot of time studying poverty and measuring it endlessly, but they don't study inequality.
Ekonomen och grävande journalisten James S. Henry arbetade förr som chefsekonom på konsultföretaget McKinsey. Han har gjort en uppskattning av det kapital som finns parkerat i de globala skatteparadisen. En beräkning som varken Internationella valutafonden eller Världsbanken någonsin har gjort. Det gör Henrys försiktiga uppskattning till den första i sitt slag, och den har hittills inte blivit ifrågasatt.
It's kind of like estimating the size of a black hole. We came up with a headline number of $21 to $32 trillion as of the year end 2010, which is an astonishing figure. Nobody else had ever done that. The embarrassing fact is that the rich countries in the world, supposed to be the most responsible and so-called developed countries, are running this kind of shell game for the world. We figure that of the $21 to $32 trillion of offshore wealth owned by private individuals, about a third of that is from the developing world.
Rundturen tar oss till Nederländerna. Landet är en viktig global knutpunkt när det gäller att reducera de multinationella företagens skattebörda. Landet har ingått flest skatteavtal i världen. I kombination med mycket låga skattesatser på immateriell egendom innebär det att 91 av världens 100 största företag vill slussa sina intäkter via Nederländerna.
Dus het hele Robeco Afrika-fonds. Die zitten in Botswana, Egypte, Ghana, Kenia, Mauritius, Nigeria.
För att få en bättre uppfattning om kapitalflödenas omfattning har finansjournalisterna Siim Eikelenboom och Gabi de Groot kartlagt hur de multinationella företagen går tillväga för att undvika skatt.
Wat je bijvoorbeeld ziet, dat een van de grootste bedrijven ter wereld, de Amerikaanse supermarktketen Walmart, die heeft hier, ik geloof, 6 entiteiten in Nederland. Is hier helemaal niet operationeel actief. Nou, dan weet je bijna dus per definitie waarom zit zo'n bedrijf hier. Nou, dat heeft fiscale redenen. En ze hebben ergens anders in Europa wel activiteiten. En dan laten ze hun geldstromen via Nederland lopen, waardoor ze dus fiscale voordelen hebben.
Nou, Walmart is wel leuk. Zal ik even hoe dat... Want Walmart, dat schrijf je officieel, of kijk, hoe was het ook alweer? Daarom vonden we hem niet. Kijk maar nou zo.
Het staat natuurlijk niet altijd onder de naam van. Nou, je kunt een willekeurige naam gebruiken. Je hoeft niet te zeggen per se Apple Nederland.
Dus er staat sinaasappel BV.
Kan.
Dat zou kunnen.
En hoe kom je dan ooit achter dat ze...
Nou, dat is nog enorm erg soms. Bij Walmart bijvoorbeeld, Walmart is hier actief met coöperatie. Totaal andere namen hebben. Blue Leaf of zoiets, of een hele rare Engelse namen. Hoe hebben jullie nu gevonden? Door gewoon op het adres te zoeken van een trustkantoor. En eigenlijk dan krijg je een enorme lijst met namen, hè. Soms al 2000. Dus soms gewoon aanklikken en hopen dat je dan moet je de jaarrekening opvragen. En in de jaarrekening staat soms dat ze een onderdeel zijn van het Walmart-concern. Kijk, Walmart bijvoorbeeld, die zit hier. De Russia Holding, alles wat in Rusland gebeurt, hangt hier onder dus deze Nederlandse BV. Uiteindelijk gaat dat weer terug hier naar een moeder, een LCC in de US.
Maar ze vertellen dus heel keurig dat ze onderdeel zijn van de Walmart.
Kijk, je ziet ook pure brievenbusfirma. Er werkt helemaal niemand. Het is gevestigd bij een trustkantoor. En hier zie je ook, ze hebben 4 managing directors die ook helemaal geen beloning ontvingen.
Misschien kun je het even teruggaan naar het begin. Het staat er ook vaak bij. Ja, Naritaweg is een trustkantoor.
Dus dat is een red flag eigenlijk voor jullie meteen als je dat adres...
Wij kennen die adressen,
ja. Die adressen, die zijn een aantal adressen, die kennen wij. Ja. Nou, hier zie je eigenlijk, nou ja, qua omvang...
Dat is helemaal niets, 3000 euro.
Er zit 3000 euro in.
Maar dat zegt dus niets.
Nee.
Er kunnen miljarden doorheen zijn gestroomd.
En hoe lang is dat in Nederland?
Dat kan
1 seconde in Nederland, of een fractie van een seconde in Nederland zijn.
Het stroomt door die BV heen.
Maar wat zegt dat je dan?
Nou, dat het toch wel groot is voor Nederland. Ongeveer 11.000 miljard euro wat elk jaar door Nederland stroomt. En dat kan van alles zijn. Investeringen, leningen en ja, wat er van terugkomt. Royalties, rente.
Waar zou je dat mee kunnen vergelijken?
Nou,
het is 3 tot 4 keer het bruto nationaal product van Nederland. Zeg ik dit trouwens nog goed? 3 tot 4, hè? Wat hebben we nog?
Nee, het is toch... nee, het is 20 keer.
20 keer?
20 keer het bruto binnenlands product. Recht tegenover ons aan het Prins Bernhardplein te Amsterdam zit een van de grootste trustkantoren ter wereld, namelijk Intertrust. En daar kijken wij dagelijks op uit.
En wat gebeurt daar dan?
Daar worden dus alle brievenbusvennootschappen beheerd.
Maar welke bedrijven zitten daar bijvoorbeeld?
BBC, hè?
Ja.
BBC World zit hier. Gazprom.
Ja.
Gazprom zit hier ook. Maar als je bijvoorbeeld kijkt naar de Kamer van Koophandel, je typt bijvoorbeeld dit adres uit, dan zie je dan waarschijnlijk 2000 firmanamen.
2000
ja.
Heb je wel eens gedaan?
Ja. Maar ze zijn tot nu toe niet erg op journalisten. Ook collega's van ons, er zijn er weinig die... volgens mij is nog niemand van ons binnen geweest daar.
Nee, klopt.
Maar hebben jullie wel eens aangebeld?
Ja, ik heb wel eens gebeld, ja. En toen heb ik gevraagd of ze me door wilden verbinden met de persvoorlichting. En dat wilden ze niet. Toen heb ik gevraagd, hebben jullie dan? Jawel. Maar verder dan de receptie ben ik nooit gekomen.
Hur kan denna offshore-värld existera? Vilka upprätthåller den? Vilka ser till att allt fungerar och att de som utnyttjar den får bästa möjliga rådgivning? Vilka bygger den finansiella infrastrukturen och övervakar kapitalflödena? För att få svar på frågorna går färden ut på den engelska landsbygden.
There is a whole world out there of people who are letting tax havens operate. They are really three types of people. There are bankers, there are lawyers, and there are accountants. Together, we have called them the pinstripe mafia. Why? Well, because they look remarkably like me. They are probably grey-haired at the top of the tree. They are white, they are probably male, and they are professionally qualified. They probably speak English, and they quite possibly went to a British university. Most of them will be foreigners to those places. If tax havens are going to be used by wealthy people, and if it's going to be used by multinational companies, then they need to be serviced by familiar advisors. And the familiar advisors are always going to be the big four firms of accountants: PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte. They are the constant feature of every tax haven, in fact. Without one of those firms, or maybe all of those firms being present, you really will not have a tax haven. But you'll find all the familiar names of banks, whether they are British or they are Dutch or they are French or they are US. So Citigroup will be virtually everywhere. Deutsche will be virtually everywhere. So consistently the same accountants, consistently the same banks, and always lawyers to support them. Without those three things, you can't really have a tax haven. The language that is used offshore is very careful. So we will find tax minimization. We will find neutral taxation. I love the phrase that we're looking for neutral taxation. It actually means no tax, by the way. So neutral tax means no tax. But we couldn't say no tax because that seems, well, a little unseemly, doesn't it? You know, that's, how can we not pay tax? So we call it neutral. We will talk about tax optimization. Well, tax optimization means no tax again. Let's be clear, that's what it means. But all of this jargon is designed to make everybody feel comfortable, as though they are managing an environment and making choices that are legitimate and proper. Actually, they're trying to get round the law. But of course, that's the last thing that anybody will say.
Advokaterna, bankdirektörerna, revisorerna och miljonärerna verkar inte höra hemma någonstans utan är i ständig rörelse mellan sina olika investeringar i fast egendom. Som alltid är skyddad och behagligt belägen i en värld som inte är begränsad till London, New York eller Monaco. Så vilka är centren, zonerna och öarna som invånarna i offshorevärlden rör sig mellan? Hur ser de egentligen ut?
The zone becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. It can't be stopped, a kind of self-perpetuating agent of extra-state territory. And the free zones are facilitating capital movements because they provide incentives that help you shelter some of the taxes and allow you to own property, allow you to have cheap labor. And the laws for each of these zones are different. For instance, in Dubai Media City, there's free speech, because ABC and NBC and all of you, they're headquartered there. So you can say things which you can't say right outside the gate. The world is kind of addicted to the incentives that go with the zone. So now everything is in the zone. And it's meant to make into the zone a place where a corporate family would see a home there.
Men nu till en något mindre exotisk miljö. Nästa anhalt på den globala rundturen är Bishops Avenue i London. En gång kallades den Miljonärsgatan, men är nyligen omdöpt till Miljardärsgatan.
It's an internal world going on. It's a sort of world in itself. It's an inside, secret kind of realm.
So if I would be a billionaire and I don't want to pay tax, what do I do?
If you're a billionaire, you don't have any contact with money at all. You may have some special issued black credit card that you can only use in an ATM in Monaco or something. But what you do is rather like the way that the criminal erases his traces. You make yourself invisible. You don't have any contact with money. This is all happening behind the scenes. Nothing has got your name on it. Yeah? You just deal with cash. You don't need to spend any money. You haven't come in any contact with it at all.
But if I want to buy my Ferrari?
You want to buy your Ferrari? Well, I don't think you're going to be doing it yourself. You're going to be going to a leasing company that's in Cayman Islands and who are going to be organising it for you. When you wake up in the morning, it's probably just outside your house. I mean, you want to disappear. If you want to, this is what you have to become almost invisible. And this is the way that you can protect yourself and keep the financial police or the tax man or the media off your back. You become a sort of non-person. You become this offshore ghostly spirit, rather like Hamlet's father.
This is an incredibly concentrated industry. 0.14% of the world's population, less than 10 million people, control about 95% of the offshore private wealth. They're citizens of nowhere. In the interests of this underlying group at the very top of the global economic order that has come to have more influence than ever in the last 20 years under the impact of globalization, their interests, I think, are fundamentally at odds with the interests of the rest of us in shared tax institutions, in shared bank regulation institutions across borders. They've been able to game this nation-state system for their own purposes.
Men gäller samma lagar och regler i den här finansiella skuggvärlden som i vår egen värld, där deklarationen regelbundet kommer i brevlådan? Det vet Eva Jolie en hel del om. Som domare ledde hon en gång framgångsrikt en utredning om en fransk korruptionsskandal och blev då flera gånger hotad till livet. Nu sitter hon i EU-parlamentet och utreder effekterna av att EU varje år går miste om 1000 miljarder euro i skatteintäkter.
La question de savoir si c'est légal ou pas légal, ce n'est pas suffisant parce qu'il y a toute la notion d'abus de droit et l'utilisation intensive faite par les multinationales des paradis fiscaux à l'apparence de la légalité, mais dans beaucoup de cas, en réalité, s'il y avait une enquête et si les services fiscaux étaient outillés pour chercher vraiment, on s'apercevrait qu'ils tomberont sous la notion d'abus de droit, donc ça serait illégal. Et c'est là on voit le cœur du mécanisme qui consiste à transférer ce qui aurait dû être des ressources publiques du monde entier, mais essentiellement des pays en voie de développement, vers des actionnaires privés. C'est le colonialisme poursuivi par d'autres moyens.
Rundturen går vidare till Kenya för att se vilka konsekvenser den finansiella skuggvärlden får för Afrika. Johannes Chiminja och hans kollegor utreder hur de multinationella företagen i Afrika redovisar sina kapitalflöden för att kunna betala så lite skatt som möjligt.
The basic registration of the company, we have one employee in the Netherlands, there is a red flag. They don't know we are doing this, because if they know, they will definitely cover the loopholes.
Johannes Chiminja visar att ett skatteparadis inte nödvändigtvis är synonymt med palmkantade stränder. Här är en av Kenias 65 särskilda ekonomiska zoner.
Right now we are in Athi River, where the Athi River export processing zone is domiciled. It is like an enclosed, a bonded area where companies, manufacturers are domiciled, and they do their manufacturing inside, and all the products they manufacture are meant for export purposes. These are a formal way of tax avoidance. Here in Kenya, companies are given a 10-year tax break initially. Then after that 10 years, they are given, they are charged a corporate tax rate of 25%, which is lower than the general corporate tax rate on the market. And there also is no withholding tax, which is charged.
So you could say that this is, in a way, a tax haven on a very small scale.
Yes, a government-initiated tax haven.
Att slippa skatt under en period låter bra, och tusentals skatteparadis finns att tillgå. De existerar i alla former och storlekar, både i Afrika och i lokala affärsparker. Men har löftena om utveckling och sysselsättning infriats?
You remember those from VAT, from goods and services that are manufactured. Now we also get income from customs and excise. We are giving away customs.
Vid Nairobis universitet har Atiya Waris i flera år studerat effekterna av de ofta hemliga skattearrangemangen.
Basically, these are zones where you will go, you will build your factory, and then for 10 years maybe the government will not collect tax from you. These exist pretty much in every country in Africa right now as we speak. And what we've discovered in all the countries is that when that 10-year period ends, they close up and they move. So that's what has happened. In the Kenyan EEZs, there are no companies that last longer than 10 years. And if they have, the ownership has changed. So when the ownership changes, then the tax holiday gets extended by an additional 10 years. When companies investing, mining companies are investing in a country, they're coming because that natural resource exists in that country. It's not because of the tax. They're coming. The minerals are not going to be able to move. They're not going to take a walk across the border because you raise up your tax. But for some reason, this concept has just not penetrated into developing country governments. They still think that they have to beg multinational corporations to come into the country and then beg them to set up. But what actually happens is they take the resources and then they go. This is crazy. The whole point of a tax holiday is that you get a break for 10 years while you set up your business, you crystallize it, then you start to show profit. Then you're in the country and making profits and paying taxes. That was the point of giving you the 10-year startup. Not that you come in, invest, extract as much as you can and then leave the country. That's exploitation. When they don't pay their fair share, government looks for tax in another place. And inevitably, especially in my continent, they're looking for it in VAT. With VAT, it is the products that you use, the food that you eat, the water that you drink sometimes has VAT on it, the Pampers that you buy for your child, even the milk powder that you're going to use to feed your baby. So VAT is paid by the end user of the product, which is you and me and everybody else. And that means poor people are paying a larger percentage of their salaries in tax. I don't think that's fair, because no matter where you go in the world now, people are poor. People don't have housing. People are losing their houses and have to go on to government subsidies. That is the direction of society right now, and it has to be reversed. And actually, we now know where the money is. It's parked in these offshore havens. And if it can be moved, they move it. But if it can't be moved, it sits there.
it difficult to find jobs here, you think?
Due to restrictions on access to entry into the premises, there could be some barriers for the general public to get access into it.
This whole nation-state system has become kind of obsolete from the standpoint of taxation. And what you've had is the rise of tax competition. So, the UK cuts its tax rate in February to 20%. Canada cut their corporate tax rate to 15%. European countries will then respond. You basically have a race to the bottom. The tax competition has grown up, I think, as a response to this neoconservative argument that we will all be better off and grow faster with tax cuts. For the 30 years we've had this giant experiment of tax cuts. Well, what have we seen? We haven't seen faster growth. We haven't seen more responsible behavior from the banks. We've seen more money going out of the countries because it's very hard to compete with zero. And zero is what you get in a haven.
Det är inte lätt att se vilka fördelar skatteparadisen får. Men för de multinationella företagen handlar allt om att redovisa så låg vinst som möjligt. Det kan ske genom överföring av mjukvarupatent eller immateriell egendom till ett holländskt brevlådeföretag. Sen ser man till att det utländska dotterbolaget betalar royalties dit. På så sätt reduceras moderbolagets vinst. Och förvånande nog är bara en mycket liten del av royaltyflödena skattepliktiga. Hur liten då? Det kommer bolagen i hemlighet överens om med skattemyndigheten i Nederländerna. Så gör Apple och så gör Pfizer. Konstruktionen fungerar till och med för en kopp frappuccino.
Wat bijvoorbeeld Starbucks doet, dat is het merk Starbucks. Maar iedere koffiesoort die ze hebben, bijvoorbeeld frappuccino of iedere soort, dat is ook weer wetten gedeponeerd. Die merken die hangen uiteindelijk onder Amerika, maar die zitten al met de sublicenties en ondergebracht in Nederland. Dus op het moment iedere keer dat er bijvoorbeeld in Duitsland of in Frankrijk of willekeurig land een Starbucks-vestiging wordt geopend, maar iedere keer als mensen bijvoorbeeld een cappuccino bestellen of wat dan ook, is er iedere keer weer moet je een deeltje merkrecht gaan betalen. Dat vloeit dan weer naar Nederland. En dat soort dingen zijn soms in die jaarstukken heel moeilijk te zien. Toch, Starbucks blijft een fascinerend voorbeeld, omdat het is een bedrijf dat zich natuurlijk ook op een website enorm profileert. De koffie bijvoorbeeld is vaak fairtrade, daar pochen ze mee. Als je naar een website gaat, dan zie je ook dat ze gebouwen proberen te ontwikkelen die helemaal energie-neutraal zijn. Dus een hele manier, een hele PR, een hele marketing. Dat is een bedrijf van, jong, wij zijn begaan met de mensheid, maatschappelijk verantwoord ondernemen. En dan komt zo'n bedrijf opeens fel in de publiciteit te liggen in Engeland, omdat ze blijkt dat ze nauwelijks belasting betalen. Ja, dat is natuurlijk voor zo'n bedrijf is dat killing.
Här diskuterar ett brittiskt parlamentsutskott jakten på förlorad bolagsskatt, alltså brittisk skatt på bolagsvinsterna. Det är ett unikt tillfälle att få höra vad de ansvariga har att säga.
The purpose of our session this afternoon is to try and understand why you don't pay the corporation tax, really. That's the issue that we're focusing on this afternoon. So can I start with Starbucks, Mr. Olsted? My understanding is that you filed in Companies House losses for most of the years that you've been running coffee houses in the UK. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And the other thing that is odd to me is that if you've made losses in the UK over 15 years, what on earth are you doing business here?
We know that we must be in the UK to be a successful global company.
But you're losing money here. It just doesn't ring true, Mr. Olsted.
No.
That's what frustrates taxpayers in the UK. Doesn't ring true. You've got to give us a better explanation.
Mr. Olsted, my heart's begun to bleed for you. I'm going to have to rush out down Victoria Street and have a double caramel macchiato because you're in such a bad way. I mean, for 14 years of trading in this country, and you've paid what? 1.6 million in corporation tax. I mean, you're either running the business very badly or there's some fiddle going on.
I think
Revisorn Richard Murphy satt bland åhörarna och skickade tweets med frågor och kommentarer under parlamentsutskottets utfrågning. Han har visat sig vara en oumbärlig kunskapskälla genom sin kartläggning av skatteflykten via skatteparadisen.
Accountancy is deliberately hiding what is going on in tax havens, making sure that secrecy is always going to happen. Now, I should be clear here. I was trained by KPMG. So, a long time ago, I worked for one of these firms. I'm still bound not to talk about client affairs from 30 plus years ago. I can't do that. I'm not allowed to talk about them. I can't, I won't, because that is fundamental to the code of ethics.
What would happen if you would do that?
Oh, I could be struck off as an accountant. I could lose my professional status. I could be fined. I could be sued by the client. So, therefore, there is a considerable climate of fear inside of all of these organisations, accounting, lawyers, bank, that you will toe the line, you will not speak, and those who do, the whistleblowers, will forever not work.
You're paying on royalties in the Netherlands, aren't you? Is there a special low tax regime in the Netherlands on royalties?
Yes, there is. We have a tax ruling that we've had since
So
we
it's
opened.
less?
Oh, yes, it's a very low tax
So
rate.
there is a tax advantage to you for paying the royalties in the Netherlands?
It's a favorable tax rate that we have in the Netherlands on all income that comes in from all over the
That's
region.
why you put it into the Netherlands?
It's not why, but it is an attractive reason to be there. There's no question.
It's why.
What is
Steve?
the tax rates you pay in the Netherlands?
I'm very happy to provide that to the committee. I am bound confidentially to the Dutch government on that. Just confidential.
Confidential to whom?
Sorry. The tax authority, under our Dutch ruling, they've asked us not to share that publicly.
So you have a special arrangement to allow you to pay less tax in the Netherlands?
Yes, it's a low tax ruling that we have in place.
And it's for that reason that you therefore transfer the profits from the UK, which are booked as losses in the UK, into the Netherlands. Some of that then goes back to the States, but the rest of it is paid at a lower tax rate in the Netherlands under a Dutch tax ruling.
We've been communicated to...
You don't want to reveal to us.
Uzi, from the perspective
your
of the British
chap
tax.
is nodding behind. It's a sweetheart deal you don't want to reveal to us.
Chair, I think there might be some issues we should be raising with the Dutch government.
Well, I'm just wondering, is it the Dutch authorities that said you couldn't reveal it?
Yes.
They've asked us to hold that in confidence over time.
Okay.
The other thing I would also highlight, we have paid in excess of 100 million in payroll taxes in the last 5 years. We've paid tens of millions in business rates in the past 5 years. And
I've heard this argument before. Let me just kill this argument because it really makes me cross. On the one hand, so does every other business. So the community-based bookshop that you're putting out of business also pays business rates, also pays its PAYE. And the other thing is you depend on the services that come out of the tax you pay. So, you depend on the ability of your of getting your goods around. So you've got to get the roads in place. You depend on all those things. And probably worst of all, both you and Mr. Alsted employ people on probably minimum wage if we're lucky. And then we, the taxpayer, pick up the tax credit bill for that too. So we're putting a lot of money back into the people you put, and you're not putting enough tax into our economy. That's what's riling us all.
I don't.
Sorry, I shouldn't have done that.
This is the idea about, the corporations, the Amazons, the Googles, the Starbucks, the idea that there are two faces to these organizations. You have the public face, and some of them offer very good services. It's, they're consumer orientated. They deliver stuff to your door. It's remarkable. Then you have this underground secret side of what's going on. You're using a means of deception and trickery and disguise to get what you want, to be able to preserve your freedom of operation, as it were. Now, what is it that a criminal does? They do exactly this. It's exactly the same technique. They will set up a system which they cover their tracks to show to the outside world that, I'm fine, I'm an honest guy, but really you've got some dirty business going on underneath. Or, dirty, you're hiding something.
Some people who work there actually think they're doing the right thing. Some people believe that this is politically, ethically and morally acceptable. They think that they are part of an economic crusade for competition. Now, that means that they might be doing something which is called the Migo principle. My eyes glaze over. you actually look at one little bit, it's okay. When you look at the whole thing, it fails. Do the auditors stand back and necessarily look at whole structures and arrangements and say, is this acceptable as a whole? I don't know. But I have to say, some of the evidence is that the structures that are in place look to be tax abusive, even if legal. And let's stress, you can be tax abusive and legal at the same time. In other words, you're working within the gaps in the law, because that's what I define tax avoidance as.
Nous n'avons pas pris les mesures qui s'imposaient parce que nous souhaitons, nous pensons encore que le secteur financier est un secteur qui produit de la richesse pour l'Union européenne et nous ne voyons pas qu'il nous mène au bord du précipice et peut-être au-delà. On voit des choses absolument absurdes. On voit Chypre, dont le système bancaire surdimensionné s'effondre, demander l'aide de l'Union européenne. Le Chypre est un paradis fiscal, un endroit de lessivage de fonds noirs de la mafia russe. Le taxpayers' money, l'argent des citoyens européens, va aller sauver les banques chypriotes pour dédommager les criminels cachés russes. Dans quel monde vivons-nous?
Accountants have not been subject to the same degree of scrutiny for some time. They've had a remarkably good recession. Very few countries have paid much attention to the role of accountants in the creation of the crisis that we have around the world. I mean, just to give an example, the accounts of all the banks that failed, whether it be in France or Belgium or Switzerland or the UK or anywhere, were signed off by a Big Four firm of accountants as being true and fair. Now, why weren't those accountants criticised for signing off accounts which clearly were not true and fair because these banks were basically bust? But they've got away with it. One of the problems that we have when we look at the role, for example, of the accountants is that there is nobody who judges the accountants. In fact, so powerful is their position that we now see them far from being regulated. Instead, they're taking over the regulators. So in the UK, the new chairman of our tax authority is the former senior partner of KPMG in this country. The same thing is happening in Australia. Literally, a KPMG person is taking over at the tax authority. Very many governments are looking at privatisation. Who do they look to prepare the reports on their privatised businesses? Well, it's the Big Four firms of accountants. If they want advice on how to reorganise their tax systems, they set up a committee and call in the experts. Who are those experts? It's the Big Four firms of accountants. So we have the accountants so in charge of the rules. And this stuff, by the way, is backed by the European Union, which basically means that at the end of the day, we end up with the EU passing laws written by the Big Four accountants about how the Big Four accountants should be regulated and report, with the consequence that they're not accountable to anybody.
So how far from Nairobi are we now?
61 kilometers.
How do you know so precise?
It was written. A zebra.
Färden går från Mombasa till det som ska bli nästa utpost i det skattefria universumet.
So it's enormous, Johannes.
Yeah, it's very large. It's about slightly above 2 hectares.
And what do they expect to happen here?
They expect to have like a communication hub, an ICT hub.
Do you know if they will come?
Well,
the Google and the IBMs?
It demands a bit of some marketing to bring those big companies here in the middle of nowhere.
What does it say?
ICT Technopolis Vision 2030 flagship project. There's RIM, there's Microsoft, there's HP, Toshiba. It seems they are focusing on big brands, MacBook.
We've grown used to the benefits of offshore. It's delivered us finance and cheap loans, but where did that go? This is kind of the dilemma that people worry about. I mean, they think, well, if you take away all these funneling your profits here, and you do this and you do that, then would we have Amazon doing what it does? I mean, they've been able to, perhaps along with their competition, the people that they compete with in the market, they've been faced with the same setup of places that they can book their profits and their losses, but maybe they're just better at it. I mean, that's a horrid realization that these things that we love, that we need, have got used to, and the people who are good at it have got there through their clever sort of financial, fiscal manipulation. It involves really everybody. It involves governments, it involves businesses, it involves consumers and citizens. And we want, we're greedy. We're greedy people. We are in a battle with each other and our governments to survive, to make money. And if your business is making money, you will bloody go out and fight your competitors, the taxman, the government, to get your own way. Why not?
The belief is that in total, US corporations now have well over $1 trillion of money stored in the likes of Bermuda. This money cannot go to the shareholders of these companies because it would have to go through the US parent company. I believe that the shares in these companies are seriously overvalued because if the value was ever to eventually get to the shareholder, significant extra tax bills would be payable, which would inevitably bring the share price down. So we're seeing market distortions as a result of this. The only good news is that they've actually got to do something with this money, and they're lending it to governments to pay for the deficits that most countries around the world are running. So mysteriously, tax havens are funding the deficits which governments are running because they can't collect enough cash in the form of tax from companies because they're hiding it in tax havens. So we go round in a giant circle here where these companies are lending this money to governments instead of paying it in tax to make sure that the whole world system keeps going. It's bizarre, but that's what is going on. A political party that wants to go and say, I will raise tax to clear our deficit, faces this enormous pressure from multinational corporations who say, we'll walk out of the door, whether they would or wouldn't. All of that means that the options available to government to actually go forward to generate new growth to meet the needs of their electorates is being undermined. And therefore this is, frankly, threatening democracy, in my opinion.
Rundturen genom finansiella strukturer och kapitalflöden går mot sitt slut. Denna värld är svår att kartlägga, men den påverkar oss alla. Det är en värld som har fått frodas utan att enskilda länder tycks ha haft någon större insikt om risken för hela vårt system.
La Commission a promis qu'elle allait établir sa propre liste des paradis fiscaux. Mais vous voyez, ça fait 3 années que je suis parlementaire, ça n'a pas bougé. Donc mon espoir à moi, ce sont les citoyens. C'est le fait que les Londoniens, un jour, ne vont plus supporter que seule la classe moyenne et les pauvres payent l'impôt, que Starbucks ne paye pas d'impôt, que Coca-Cola ne paye pas d'impôt, que Ikea ne paye pas d'impôt, que Total ne paye pas d'impôt. Je me dis, un jour, les citoyens vont dire, nous payons 40% dans les pays scandinaves, nordiques, peut-être 20% en France, que la demande et la révolte contre cela viendrait des citoyens.
Do you, all of you, accept that alongside your duties to your shareholders, as Mr. Britton has just alluded to, you have obligations to the societies in which you operate and from which you derive huge benefits, and that those obligations include paying tax?
Yes. Yes, very much so.
And do you accept the principle that profits should be taxed in the countries in which they're made and where genuine economic activity is concerned?
Very much so.
Yes. Profits should be taxed in the countries where the economic activity takes place that drives those profits. So in our case, where the innovation takes place. Our business is made in California.
I would make a fortune if I worked for, well, what my wife calls the dark side. But on the other hand, I can sleep at night, and I think that's the big difference.
Ce n'est pas de répandre les écoles des Indiens lorsqu'on est Coca-Cola. C'est de payer des impôts au Mexique.
Starbucks heeft nu gezegd van, nou, wij willen juist graag wel belasting betalen.
Dit is uniek. Nee, dit is wat Starbucks al slaat als echt een uniek voorbeeld.
Dokument utifrån är tillbaka först om 2 veckor. Då med ett pinfärskt reportage om krisen i Egypten. Missa inte det.